month, I was having an email conversation with my cousins and uncles in Taiwan. We talked about a great many things, and then we got to the topic of vacationing, during which they sent me a couple of pictures of their family staying in a hotel in the mountains and hiking through a forest. But the first thing I noticed was not their smiles or their beautiful landscape behind them. It was their lack of face masks, even in crowded areas. I know, COVID-19 has really gotten to me, right? But the funny thing is, there hasn't been a single case of COVID in Taiwan since September, even though at one time they had more cases than the US did. This truly attests to, as Time magazine called it, a great American failure when it comes to handling this pandemic. Now, the question brought before us today is, how should the incoming Biden administration plan to respond to the uncontrolled spread of COVID-19 in the US? And I believe there's three clear things they can do. First, they should instate a national mask mandate with actual legal enforcement. Second, they should produce standardized regulations on when schools, restaurants, and other organizations are required to close. And third, they should require social and news media to check the scientific validity of content before it is posted to prevent misinformation. Now, why do you think my Taiwanese relatives are free to live life now? Well, it's because the government required 100% of the citizens to wear masks throughout the initial months of the pandemic. The first way the Biden administration should respond to COVID-19 is that they should instate a national mask mandate with actual legal enforcement. According to the CDC on November 20th, cloth masks, not even surgical ones, have recently been shown to block up to 80% of respiratory particles containing COVID-19. But I know you and many others have heard this statistic way too many times. Why then are we not listening? Brookings on August the 31st tells us that Americans know that masks are for public benefit, but the reason they still do not wear them is because they believe they are exercising their right and freedom not to. MIT on August the 5th tells us in a research study that if masks were mandated in April, tens of thousands of lives and tens of millions of dollars of economic flow would have been saved. But contrary to popular belief, there would not have been widespread protests if information spread correctly at that time. Now, going back to why my relatives in Taiwan are having fun on vacation, all schools, restaurants, and bars across the nation of Taiwan shut down simultaneously in February at the government's unified policy. The second way the Biden administration should respond to COVID-19 is they should produce standardized regulations on when schools, restaurants, and other organizations are required to close. Alabama Political Reporter on November the 30th tells us that in what seemed like a victory for churchgoers, the Supreme Court ruled that governors could not prevent churches from gathering, no matter how bad COVID got. Now, I'm a Christian too, and I haven't been to church since February. But I attend both Sunday school and service online every week, as well as Bible studies on Wednesday and Friday. There's no reason that the government should step in and not encourage, but rather illegalize necessary restrictions to prevent the spread of this pandemic. The Atlantic on March the 31st tells us that back in March, the government did not impose national guidelines and restrictions, so each state had differing approaches. What happened was that each state's government could not control entrances and exits from other states. So oftentimes, their work to protect their citizens was futile. NPR on March the 27th tells us that even experts like Fauci, who maintain that national shutdowns are unwarranted, support the closing of state borders and other unified policies to contain hotspots and reduce contact, with no recommendations on school openings or limits on positivity rates with closings. Many schools around the nation are scrambling to make unscientific or even unsafe decisions regarding how to open and close their schools. And finally, what I believe is the most important reason that the virus didn't become widespread in Taiwan is the news media. The media there always reported scientific facts with bias toward collective safety, not toward an individualistic selfishness. The third way the Biden administration should respond to COVID-19 is they should require social and news media to check the scientific validity of content before it is posted to prevent misinformation. Scientific American on October the 11th tells us that a study by the National Bureau of Economic Research suggests that there is a significant correlation between areas of the country that received TV programming that downplayed the severity of the pandemic and areas that had greater numbers of cases and deaths. NBC on November the 30th tells us that even after Facebook discontinued several huge anti-vax pages, the movement still continued through smaller but more far-reaching follower groups. In fact, there are more and more anti-vaxxers in a period when vaccination should be the most welcomed. The Royal Society on October 14 tells us that a study showed that being exposed to misinformation has a significantly negative correlation with willingness for one and one's loved ones to get vaccinated and willingness to trust and obey public health protocol. So let's go back and do a brief review. The question brought before us today is, how should the incoming Biden administration plan to respond to the uncontrolled spread of COVID-19 in the US? And I believe there's 3 clear things they should do. First, they should instate a national mask mandate with actual legal enforcement. Second, they should produce standardized regulations on when schools, restaurants, and other organizations are required to close. And third, they should require social and news media to check the scientific validity of content before it is posted to prevent misinformation. Now, I have to admit, I was very jealous when I saw my Taiwanese relatives vacationing together and living life as before. They sent those pictures to me like they did any other year, without thinking that COVID might make me jealous of them. But I have hope that with a vaccine and a new administration to take the reins, maybe we'll be more compliant and less resistant to governmental restrictions and recommendations. I have hope that next summer I'll get revenge by sending my relatives vacation pictures that will make them all jealous. But most of all, I have hope that Americans can rise up to our challenge and work with a new government to reinstate our ideals of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Thank you.